It's such a delight for me to be joining in with you guys in worship. So beautiful, and it's not about production, is it? It's about the Lord, which is ideal for worship, and something that gets confused a lot in big churches when it does become more like a production. So, if you were with us, and I know not everyone was, this morning we talked about AI and really sort of we won't know if this is working until I do something with a speaker. So we'll find out if this is working. Hopefully it is. Kind of the overhyped version of AI, which is sometimes called strong AI, the idea that computers have become as competent as humans are, more competent than some humans, and eventually they'll outstrip us entirely to the point where computers and AI will develop the next generation of AI and then leave us in the dust, maybe kill us or use us for something. But the computers will take over. That's a hype version of AI. And it seems very different from the hype version of evolution, which says that from nothing came everything and God wasn't necessary. God is a later invention of humans, but there was a multiverse that spit out one universe. Ours is one of maybe an infinite number, and this universe has physical properties that eventually led to life inevitably somewhere on an Earth-like planet. And that life inevitably evolved and became more complex and inevitably gave rise to intelligent life. Maybe the intelligent life looks like humans, maybe it looks like something else. But once you get intelligent life, inevitably religion is invented, and so God is a byproduct of something that starts with nothing, really. So those are the corrosive versions of philosophy that are the extreme forms or the hyped forms of these two ideas that seem quite different, but they're connected philosophically. So we're talking, the overall theme here is the bad philosophy behind AI hype and evolution hype, and we put a name to the philosophy. We're calling it materialism. You could call it physicalism. Naturalism is another word that's slightly different, but they're all kind of wed together. And materialism, we're saying, is this. It's the belief that the physical universe is all that exists. There isn't anything else. So if you think there's something that isn't part of the physical universe, you're wrong, and it actually is. And so God would be one of those, or the human spirit, the human soul, things that we think are real and not physical. A physicalist or a materialist would say you're confused. And I'll tell you how when you're thinking or your soul, it's really just chemistry in your brain, and God is really an invention of intelligent beings with chemistry going on in their brains. So we started this morning with an honest assessment of generative AI, and I didn't go too far into, we gave a critique and we talked about sort of the moral landscape of AI, but I didn't leave it with a strong proof that this basic philosophical underpinning is wrong. We're going to do that now, okay? So today, Tuesday evening, 3 quick ways to see that materialism is wrong. And when I say quick, it's a relative term. 3 quick ways to see that materialism is wrong. And sometimes I say simple ways, but when I teach these to my students at Biola, and I know when I go through these, some people will be, I don't understand that, and you said that was easy. I'm not saying they're easy. I'm saying you don't need to know anything that's in the realm of expertise. So you could have very basic understanding of probability, and some of us don't, and that's fine. Very basic understanding of logic, very basic understanding of these various things, and the result pops out of these. I don't want to presume that everybody has, not everybody did even high school level probability, so I'll give a little primer on probability. So don't worry, I'm not saying that when you see this argument, you'll immediately get it and you can use it. I'm saying you don't have to go get a PhD, in mathematics to get this. You can just get basic level understanding and make these arguments work. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so 3 ways to do this, to take down materialism. And I'm really going to focus on this as kind of a key aspect of materialism. We had this text out this morning. This is from The Blind Watchmaker. It's Richard Dawkins saying, here's what really made us. Not God, but blind, immaterial forces. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play the role of a watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. So BW is blind watchmaker, and I'll use that for shorthand for this thesis, which is kind of a bedrock of materialism, because everyone has to have a worldview. And if you're a physicalist, materialist, you have to explain us. And this is how you explain us if you're a materialist, okay? Okay, I'm going to show 3 conceptual problems. So these will be our 3 takedowns of the blind watchmaker thesis in particular, which is a key cornerstone of materialism. The first is it doesn't meet the usual standard of a credible scientific hypothesis. And this will be the easiest to grasp. The next will be a little more challenging, and the third will be a little more challenging. I'm just giving you a warning. But it's all accessible. None of this requires expertise. The second one is that the materialist conception of humanity is incoherent. And this is where someone asked about, when we're talking about mind versus brain. I'll unpack mind versus brain here. And then the third one is the raw improbability of life by blind causes makes all such accounts implausible. Okay, and this will make more sense as we move along. So first, the blind watchmaker thesis doesn't meet the usual standard of a credible scientific hypothesis. And to show this, I want to give you what I consider to be a credible scientific hypothesis, which doesn't mean it's true, but it's very credible. And it has to do with this question. This is an image taken from the Hubble Space Telescope. Things that a long time ago with more primitive telescopes we thought were stars up there turn out to be galaxies. And galaxies can have hundreds of billions of stars in them, maybe 1 trillion in some of the larger galaxies. So there's this huge universe out there with galaxies that are each huge and have maybe up to 1 trillion stars in a galaxy. So a reasonable question is, where did these things come from? Where did stars come from and where did galaxies come from? And I'm going to tell you what an astrophysicist would say in answer to that. And I'm not saying it's correct. I'm saying it's plausible, okay? And I'll show you that it's plausible. So these are the observations that build up to a hypothesis. The first is that hydrogen is the most abundant element in deep space. And you can tell this because there's a signature of the hydrogen electron. There's an electron drop, and it gives off a signature that's 21 centimeter radio wave. And you can see, if you do a radio telescope, you can see that signature out there wherever you point the telescope, which means there's hydrogen out there. You're getting that electron signature of hydrogen out there. Now, there's not a lot of hydrogen because in deep outer space, there isn't much of anything. But most of what's out there is hydrogen, okay? Hydrogen is the most abundant element in deep outer space. Second fact, massive clouds of hydrogen are expected to undergo gravitational compaction. This is what gravity does. Gravity is mass being attracted to mass. Now, we don't usually think of it that way because this bottle has mass and this podium has mass and it's not doing anything, right? But if I drop this, what mass is that being attracted to? It's the Earth. And it's because it's a very weak attraction and the Earth, oh, it actually landed upright. Score. The Earth is very, very massive. The gravitational constant is very, very small, which means something has to be, one of the two masses has to be very large for there to be a big attraction. But you can actually measure the attraction of smaller masses. All masses are attracted to each other, which means if you have hydrogen strewn out for light years and light years and light years, a vast expanse that's got hydrogen in it, that hydrogen is going to be attracted to itself and you're going to get compaction of hydrogen. Eventually you get extreme compaction of hydrogen. And that brings us to this fact. Under extreme compaction, hydrogen undergoes fusion to form helium. So if we had the periodic table here, hydrogen has 1 proton in the nucleus. It's number 1 on the periodic table. What's number 2? Is helium. It has 2 protons. And how do we know this is true? How do we know that's true? This is the H-bomb. This is how we do the H-bomb, is we use conventional explosives to put hydrogen under extreme pressure under conditions where there's also a fusion source, usually a fission source, and hydrogen then fuses to form helium and you get a massive, massive explosion. We know this is true because we've done it. Okay, this is also true. The hydrogen to helium fusion reaction gives off lots of heat and light. That's why it's a bomb. That's why it's so destructive. Well, it turns out the sun, our sun, 93 million miles away, you can feel the heat coming off of a massive hydrogen to helium fusion reactor. And that's what the sun is, and that's what stars are. I'm saying this as though this is necessarily leads us to this fact. And I want to say something more modest than that. Here's a hypothesis. The hypothesis is that stars and galaxies formed by gravitational compaction of massive clouds of hydrogen. And all I want to say here is it's very reasonable to test that and to say this could be true. Do you see that? Because it follows straightforwardly from the things we know to be true. That doesn't actually mean it is true. It just means it's a very reasonable hypothesis, and it would be very worthwhile for scientists to pursue this as an idea. And it turns out when you do pursue it, you do run into some difficulties. I'm not saying it's a slam dunk. I'm saying this stuff that we know justifies this. One of the things that you end up getting that's a complexity, have you heard of dark matter? Dark matter comes out of problems with this theory. So there are problems. But these things that we know to be true definitely say this is a reasonable hypothesis. It might be true. It's worth exploring. Okay. In other words, based on everything we know, we reasonably conclude that stars and galaxies could have formed this way. It's not a slam dunk. Okay, I want to contrast that. That's a well-framed scientific hypothesis. I want to contrast that with this hypothesis. So this is Darwin's tree of life, which says, you won't be able to read that back there, origin of life here, and you have this branching pattern where absolutely everything that's alive or ever has been alive is part of one big family tree. And the mechanism that caused all this huge variety of diversity in the living world is Darwin's mechanism of mutation and natural selection. Here's the hypothesis. Unguided natural processes, blind watchmaker, formed all of life. Now, I'm telling you, and a nice thing about this kind of argument is if you want to give this argument to someone, you can challenge them. Nobody can give you a list of facts up here that remotely adds up to this. Okay, this is a leap of logic. And I've given this talk publicly. There's 3 people who got the Nobel Prize like 6 years ago for doing laboratory version of evolution. I know 2 of them. And they would not, I'm pretty sure they would not challenge this. The reason I like this kind of argument is if anybody wants to challenge, give them the chalk. If you think there are facts that add up to the blind watchmaker thesis, give me the facts. And nobody has taken me up on this. They don't exist. It's not there. Which means this is not really a very serious scientific hypothesis. It's something that people want to be true, and they keep propping it up. Give them the chalk. You give me the facts that lead up to this, the way these facts led up to the idea that hydrogen compaction leads to stars and galaxies. It's just not there. Okay, and if someone wants to disagree, give them to me. Okay, nobody's ever done that. So that was 1. We're done with 1. 2 to go, and then we can go golfing. Okay, just a guy, sorry. The second is the materialist conception of humanity is incoherent. Now, this is going to be, there's nothing technical here, but you will have to put on your thinking caps. This is something you have to think through, and usually when I present this to people, when I teach this in my course, I teach it, and then we come back and go over it different ways several times, and eventually students start to say, oh, I get how this works. But it's going to be a little bit different from the way you've done arguing, probably. Some of you may have, this may be your thing, but it'll be a little bit of a challenge. But it doesn't require expertise. You don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to have expertise in brain science, in neuroscience, or anything else. And I'm going to do it using this principle. And this is a very commonsensical principle that I'm calling the fallacy of self-validation, okay? Fallacy meaning this doesn't work, it's false, and it's a fallacy of self-validation, and it's this. If the validity of X is in question, then X cannot provide the answer. Do you see why that's? If you're not sure Bob is honest, who can you not ask? Bob. You could ask Bob's boss. You could ask someone who's worked with Bob, whom you trust. But you can't ask Bob, because if Bob says, yes, I'm honest, that doesn't help you if you're wondering whether he's honest, because if he's dishonest, he could easily say he's honest. And this is a general principle. If the validity of X is in question, then X cannot provide the answer. You're going to have to go to something, another source that's kind of above X and can assess X. Okay, so keep that in mind. Human thought is something that we engage in, and we assume that it's valid for humans to think. And by that, we're not saying that all human thought is valid. We're not saying that humans don't make mistakes. We're saying that it's not a complete waste of time for humans to think about things, that we're capable of thought, and it's possible that we can get to the truth through thinking. But if we ask about the validity of human thought, is it at all valid for humans to think? If we go back to our principle, what can we not appeal to get an answer to that? Human thought. So there's no way we can get out of this, right? We cannot appeal to human thought if we're now putting human thought on the pedestal and saying, is this even valid at all? Okay, so, but we can't just give up, right? So what we do is, as a matter of faith, we say, well, it feels like humans can think, it feels like it's valid, so let's just take this as a bedrock assumption that it is valid, which doesn't mean that all thinking is good or right, it just means it's not a complete waste of time. Most people, most scientists you don't study this, most people don't think about this, but you are starting off you're starting off with a faith position, which is that thinking is valid, right? And you can't think to get an answer to that. Once you've said, yes, humans can think, it's a valid exercise, now we can hope to do science, but there's something else we have to take on faith to do science. Anybody know what it is? So let's say, okay, let's just say on faith, human thought is a valid enterprise. What else has to be true in order for us to do science? Science involves thought, but it involves something else. When you're doing research, you're not just thinking, you're observing the world, right? So we have this strong sense that there really is a world out there with objective properties that we can study and come to some conclusions through thinking, and that other people who are in the same world can test those. But if the external world is the X, what can we not appeal to? Or if science is the X, is science at all valid? What can we not appeal to answer that question? Science. So we can't actually prove that. That's something we take to be true. I have multiple degrees in science and was never taught this. Nobody talks about this. You have to assume on faith that there is that world out there and that it is coherent. And you know, when people say that science and Christianity are at odds, it's a historical fact that modern science came out of Christianity because the Christian worldview gave us a reason to think there is something coherent out there, because God's the architect of it all, and he's coherent, and he made us in his image, so he made it so that we can see him in it. Okay, that's how science came about. But it's a faith position. You can't do something in test tubes that shows that test tubes exist, right? You have to take that to be true on faith. And we do. Okay, whoops. So now that we've taken these things to be true on faith, we go about trying to come up with explanations of the natural world, the world around us. So I want you to consider, we've done this, we call ourselves scientists, we come up with explanations, they get validated, become very popular within the scientific community. Eventually they end up in textbooks, eventually they end up in high school textbooks, and eventually they're being taught in AP courses, so AP physics and AP biology. And we take these things to be true, and we take them to be scientific because they came from the scientific enterprise. But what if there is such an explanation that has implications for the validity of human thought? And what if the implications are that it robs you of that faith? It undercuts your faith in human thought, okay? If that were true, then it would undercut science. It would invalidate science. It would rob me of the faith position by which I started to do science. And it would actually undercut the explanation itself. So this turns out to be a self-defeating proposition, okay? Because if you take it to be true and look at the consequences, it ends up saying it's false. Or Tell me where to go.
Okay, like right about there is where you lost me.
This is general. So the fact that things fall to the earth is gravity. And there's an equation for that. And Newton wrote the equation of gravitation. That's an explanation of something. But I can take that anywhere I want to go, and it doesn't come back and haunt me when I go, wait a minute, was I right to have faith in thought? There's nothing about that that haunts me. There's nothing about that that haunts me when I go, wait a minute, am I right to think there's a world out there, right? So it works, okay? I'm saying if there is an explanation, I haven't given you the explanation yet. I'm saying if there is something in an AP text, and there is, that if you take it seriously, robs you of this, then it's in trouble because it's robbed, it's invalidated its own foundation, okay? Self-defeating argument. Like if I pound on the podium and say, nothing is certain, what's wrong with that? If you take my claim that nothing is certain seriously, then it undercuts the claim itself, right? So that's it's a self-defeating proposition. Okay, I'm going to show you that the claim that brains think is a self-defeating proposition, and this is in AP biology. This is all over biology, all over. This is the standard view of neurology, is that human mental activity is a brain function. There's no distinction between mind and brain. I'm going to show you that that is a self-defeating proposition, which means it undercuts itself, which means it's nonsense. All right. The way I do this in my book, and the way I do it in a class is to imagine, I want you to imagine yourself in a future brain imaging lab that's got technology that we don't currently have. And you're conscious, and these materialist scientists, brain scientists, are around you, and they're studying you. And they have probes all over your scalp, and they have displays all over the walls. And they're able in real time to image at any level of detail everything that's happening in your brain, okay? And they're communicating with you, and they're saying, oh, I want you to do this. I want you to count to 10 slowly and think about the numbers as you count. And you say, okay. And so you say 1, 2. They say, stop right there. You said 2. We captured this image in your frontal lobe of activity in the frontal lobe when you said 2. Is this what you mean when you say 2? T-W-O. And you say, is that what you mean when you say 2? Is this what you mean by 2? Activation of the frontal lobe in the human brain? That's what you mean. Do math for me. 2 plus 3. No, that's not what you mean, okay? That's not what you mean. You're thinking of something when you think of 2, and that's not what you're thinking of. Now you say, I'm not denying that my frontal lobe was activated when I'm counting and that it looked like this when I said 2. That's fine, I believe that, but that's not what I mean when I say 2. That's not what I mean by 2. And so they start to get aggravated with you, and they zoom in on the frontal lobe, and they say, this synapse in your frontal lobe is the specific synapse that fired when you said 2. Is this what you mean when you say 2, T-W-O? And you say, no, that's not what I mean. I'm not denying that the synapse fired. That's not at all what I mean. And they could go around with all kinds of words. They could say circle, they could say between, they could say love. And is it possible for them to show you anything that is a physical state in your brain, and you say, yes, that's what I mean by love, or yes, that's what I mean by 2, or yes, that's what I mean by triangle? No. So what's going on here, and you're trying to tell these scientists this, I'm thinking of concepts, and you're not going to find concepts in here. You're going to find physical stuff. And I'm not talking about physical stuff. I'm using my brain. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that my brain's doing stuff. I'm saying that's not the content of what I'm talking about. That's not the meaning of the words I'm using. And at that point, they get very upset with you, and they say, well, you must be confused because there isn't anything but the material world, okay? So, and then you think, okay, how deeply confused am I if the meaning of every word I'm using is false? If I'm utterly wrong about everything I'm doing, I'm deeply confused, right? So you're saying I'm insane. Basically, you're saying I'm insane. If I follow the materialist by doubting my conscious experience, I'm forced to doubt absolutely everything. Everything. Why? Because I don't have access to anything except through my conscious experience. Okay? I don't have access to anything. There's no science, there's no brains, there's no neurons, there's no periodic table, there's no nothing if I throw away my confidence in my conscious experience. I'm left with these two options. Stark contrast. Either A, I am manipulating concepts when I think, I'm working with ideas when I think, and that's what I think I'm doing. Or B, I am being manipulated by neurons. This is the positive sense of manipulate. I am fashioning ideas. I think that's what I'm doing when I'm thinking. This is the negative sense of manipulate. I'm being duped, tricked, deceived by neurons into thinking that that's what I'm doing, but I'm not. It's all the neurons doing what the neurons do. But B, self-destructs. B, self-destructs. Because if I'm duped, then I don't believe in human thought, and I don't believe in science, and I don't believe in neuroscience, and I don't believe any of this. It all goes down. It all goes up in flames once you undercut conscious experience. Which means, so are you following this? This is something you have to kind of go through and think, wow, how could you, do you see how profound the implication of this is? It undercuts physicalism, period. There cannot be a physical explanation of a human being. It's totally undercut. Why? Because my life experience, my conscious life experience is mental, and the things I'm referring to are not physical. How do I know they're not physical? You can't show me anything physical that is what I mean by these things, right? So we conclude I am manipulating concepts, and that leads us to this picture of what a human is. None of this is denying the existence or the importance or the brilliance of the design of the human body and the human brain. That's all true. It's simply saying you cannot define a human as being solely this. There has to be an immaterial mental realm in which I'm actually doing my thinking. And is my thinking connected in some way to what my brain's doing? Yes. What are some ways we can prove that? Well, just if you go low tech, what are some things that confirm to us that your brain's important, the state of your brain is important for your ability to think? Headaches. How about alcohol? Okay, alcohol is ethanol. It's 2 carbons with an oxygen and a hydrogen on it. It's a simple chemical. It's physical. And if the amount of that physical stuff in your bloodstream gets above a certain level, it's in the brain. And will that affect your ability to think? Yes, it will. Okay? And it's temporary, thankfully. But that shows you that a physical effect on the brain, it's not that the brain's irrelevant for thought, it's that the brain isn't doing the thinking. So think of your brain as this. The brain is the organ that operates in service of your conscious activity. And that means, can you have a stroke that affects in very odd ways your perception and your ability to speak? Yes. Can you have a migraine that affects those things? Yes. There's all kinds of things that go wrong in this organ, and because God has made us to be the immaterial mind, soul, spirit knit to the physical body, the body's important. And when something goes wrong with the body, you're going to affect it. It's going to affect this, okay? But they're not the same thing. So healthy brain is important for healthy mental life. But here's an interesting thing. I've got this mental realm sort of kissing the material realm. How does that work? How can there be, if I'm thinking up here in a mental realm, and what I'm claiming is if I toss the bottle of water, I don't know whose this is it Brooks? If I toss it to Brooke, okay, what just happened there? I came up with an idea of doing something up there, okay? And somehow it got moved into my motor cortex, and I actually picked up the bottle and I tossed it. And Brooke saw it coming and realizes it's going to hit me if I don't put my hand up. So she's doing something mentally up here, actually perceiving. Your optical cortex in the brain is receiving input from the optic nerve, and you're getting a perception that this is happening and I need to respond. But you consciously say, here's my response, throw up your hands to catch the bottle. That's up there, and it moves into your brain. So something is allowing a two-way translation from the world of thought, which is nothing like hydrogen and carbon and nitrogen. That's nothing to do with it, into that world of carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen, and vice versa. And how does that work? Well, the way I would think about it is, I have no idea how to operate a brain, and that's true. I have no idea. I know how to think, and some of my thoughts are the sorts of thoughts that move my body, right? Raise my hand, that's sort of a thought that actually moves my body, and somehow it works. But I have no idea what's happening in my brain to do that. Likewise, we could say, I use the periodic table of the elements and say to my students, there's only 5 forces that affect this stuff. There's only 5 physical forces. Anybody name them? Electricity, magnetism, strong and weak, nuclear, and gravity. That's it. The only things that push on material things are those. Strong and weak nuclear forces, electricity, magnetism, and gravity. Okay, which of those 5 forces pushes on 3, or love, or jealousy? They're just totally different worlds. Do you see that? There's the world of ideas, and there's the world of physics, and they're totally different worlds. Somebody has to know both worlds, and that somebody has to be the one that makes the handshake between these 2 worlds, and the handshake is made in the human brain. And it has to be done by someone who knows your thoughts before you think them and knows everything about the physical world. In other words, God, the only way to understand a human being is that God, the designer of the human being, is the mediator between these 2 realms. And the only reason you work is because God is there, and when you're wanting to move your body or do something, He knows exactly what's happening in your mind. He's moving that into your brain, and your body responds, and vice versa. When things are happening outside and you're getting stimuli coming from your sensory perceptions, that's all physical signals, but at some point it needs to stop being a physical signal and give you the impression that the bottle's coming at you, or the color is red, or the temperature is too hot. Do you see that? Physics can't explain it, and I can't explain it. Was that a question? Yeah. Morality is definitely not physical, but there are certainly moral implications of physical acts. But truth is a if we want to go into philosophy, my philosophical position is idealism, which is really that physics is God's mathematical construct. Okay? Yes, absolutely, right. You end up with consequentialism. So a typical atheist view of morality, and atheists have morals, but they'll typically ground their morals in something that's called consequentialist philosophy, which means if it ends up doing something bad, then don't do it. Okay, kicking people for no good reason is bad because it hurts, so don't kick people. But it's so easy to say, so what? It only hurts if people kick me. It doesn't hurt me if I kick other people, so I should kick other people. So it doesn't work very well, right? Okay, so this is the view of humanity that we're left with. And why is this? Is this a problem for Darwinism and materialism? Yes, because it means a material process cannot produce an immaterial thing. And we are an immaterial thing wed to a material thing, okay? So this leaves The materialistic understanding of humanity doesn't work, and we've proven it. Okay, now we're going to do something with probability here. And I recognize I'm actually going to talk about, well, here's the point. The raw improbability of life by blind causes makes all accounts of life, blind cause accounts of life, implausible. And one way to do this would be for me to show you how complex life is, and we'll do that later, not this evening. It turns out there's a very quick way to show that this can't work, that you can't have a blind cause of life. And it uses probability, but it's very simple probability. I want to start, though, by saying that our friend Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, in this book, The Blind Watchmaker, he concedes, this is broadly conceded, that that living things are exceedingly improbable in a raw sense, meaning the number of ways you could arrange matter on the periodic table, almost none of them would be alive, okay? So this is from his book, and he's a Darwinist. He says, however many ways there may be of being alive, it is certain that there are vastly more ways of being dead, or rather not alive. You may throw cells together at random over and over again for 1 billion years, and not once will you get a conglomeration that flies, or swims, or burrows, or runs, or does anything even badly that could remotely be construed as working to keep itself alive. This is Dawkins saying, yes, living things are extraordinarily rare. They require extraordinarily rare combinations of physical material. So rare that it doesn't matter how old the universe is. Even billions of years cannot possibly land on these. Now, you might be thinking, this is Richard Dawkins? How does he get out of this? Well, he gets out of this because he thinks the key word here is random. And he thinks that natural selection, because it's not random, solves this problem. But does anybody see the logical problem with thinking that natural selection can solve this problem? Yeah, you basically have to have solved this to get natural selection. He says you can't get this. You can't get things that remotely work to keep things alive apart from natural selection. But natural selection only happens when you did get something. So this presupposes, the whole theory presupposes that this problem can be solved, and he's just said it can't. So, and somehow he didn't get this. But the point I want to make here is you can prove that living things require extraordinary arrangements of matter. So we're not saying that an oak tree isn't a material thing. We're just saying if you take the carbon and the phosphorus and the nitrogen and the hydrogen and the oxygen and just willy-nilly throw them together, you'll never get an oak tree. You'll never get anything remotely resembling something alive. Okay. First, I want to give you a 1-minute introduction to probability, because not everyone has done anything with probability. Some of you have, so this will be review. Probabilities are numbers that range from 0 to 1, and they represent likelihoods. So 0, which is at one end, 0 end of our probability scale means it's impossible, and 1 means it's certain. And anything in between is something in between. It might happen, it could happen. It's fairly likely, but not certain. Okay? Here's the notation that we use, and I'll give you a few examples. So P, that means here's a probability. What's in between the parentheses after that is the probability of what? Okay, what am I talking about? So let's say the probability that someone avoids social media, okay, and I'm just taking a guess. I don't know what the number would be, but let's say it's about 0.3, which would mean that most people use social media and about 1/3 of the population doesn't, okay? I'm guessing on the number. The number might not be right. I just want to show you how you do notation with probability. Now, let me show you another aspect of probability notation, and that's this vertical bar, which means given. So it's a conditional. This is called a conditional probability. Here, it means the probability that someone avoids social media given that the person is a student, okay? So if we're given that it's a student, now what is the probability that they avoid social media? And I made the number much lower because if you go to the general population, it would be mostly older people that don't use social media. if you know that they're a student, then it's much less likely that they don't. So I said, maybe it's 0.001, okay? Again, it's between 0 and 1. It means some students don't use social media, but most do. The vast majority do. But it could also work with a different conditional P, probability of avoid social media given Joshua Wilderness Institute student, and now it becomes 1, okay? So do you see how I've got very different numbers here? It was 0.3, it became 0.001, and then it became 1, all depending on what I'm saying is the given, okay? Do you see how that? It hinges on the given, all right? And the last thing I want to say about probability is a simple multiplicative fact of probability. So here, P, the probability of A, whatever A and B are, doesn't matter. Probability of A given B times the probability of B is equal to the probability of A and B. And usually they use a different symbol. It's usually an upside down U, which means the intersection. It means joint probability. The probability of A given B multiplied by the probability of B gives you the joint probability of A and B. Okay? Another way to think about this, I mean, you could put in something. So if A is raining, probability of rain given clouds times the probability of clouds gives you the probability of raining in clouds, okay, together. Okay, now with that background, now that we're experts in probability, that's all you need to know. Okay, and here's why I like AI, because I couldn't get a good picture of a lifeless Earth-like planet, but you go to AI, here it is. Okay, consider a lifeless Earth-like planet somewhere in the universe. Okay, here it is, a picture of it. Here's the question. How likely is it that physical processes operating on that planet would produce a stone whose surface has letter-shaped indentations that form a coherent text hundreds of words long? Okay. And we don't need a number here. The numbers, remember, it goes from 0 to 1. What's your instinct on this? So close to 0 that probably we don't need to tease out whether it's 10 to the minus 10,000 or 10 to the minus 40,000. It's so close to 0 that we really probably don't have to take it seriously, right? And you could show this. So the answer is the likelihood is so low that we rightly consider it to be impossible. Even if we consider that it's a large universe, okay? Well, we're saying consider a lifeless planet. So on any given planet, it's essentially 0. But even if you consider that there's trillions of planets out there, it's still essentially 0. Okay, so a way we would represent this with our newly educated probability notation is P physics text. So a text that came on it came just from physics on a lifeless planet. It's approximately, this means approximately equal to 0, okay? It's approximately equal to 0. All right. And yet, here is a stone for which proponents of materialism give precisely this impossible explanation. This is the Gettysburg Address. Anyone been to Washington, D.C. and seen the Lincoln Memorial? That's a stone that a proponent of materialism gives precisely this probability 0 explanation. And it works like this. Lifeless Earth is a very Earth-like planet, okay? Lifeless Earth, through purely physical processes, gave rise to Earth with life, which through purely physical processes gave rise to Earth with intelligent life, which through purely physical processes gave rise to this, okay? So now that if I had a materialist here, they'd say, well, okay, but you're kind of bending things, because they would say this: with the natural evolution of humans, what was otherwise an impossible outcome became a likely outcome. Do you see why they would say that? They'd say, sure, yeah, on a lifeless planet that never is going to have life, the probability is 0. But if life evolves and intelligent life evolves, now it's very likely that written language will evolve, and it's very likely if written language evolves that people will carve language into stuff, including stone. So okay, that's it for the night. Let's go golf. Okay. No. Yeah, we're not done yet. We're not finished. Okay, I'm wanting to see the logic of how people think about this. They think that the conditional improbability trumps the raw improbability. Okay, so they're saying probability of physics text given human evolution is close to 1, right? And they say this trumps the fact that the probability of physics text is 0, is close to 0, right? Do you see that? Everyone agrees on this, okay? But they're saying this is what changes it all. Probability of physics text given human evolution is now close to 1, and that's why you have the Gettysburg Address carved into stone. No big deal. Okay, let me show you how wrong this is. This is absolutely inverted in terms of understanding of probability. Again, AI. Thanks to AI, I've got a target on haystack in a grass field. I was telling somebody that this is so great for PowerPoint because you used to have like search through image search and then you go, well, is this a copyright image or not? But now just generate it. Okay, so here's the thing. We've got an archer who's blindfolded in a field 200 meters away from a bale of hay that has a target. 200 meters away, blindfolded, and we're spinning the archer around. The archer has no idea what direction the hay bale is. There's a target on it. What's the likelihood in a single shot of the archer releasing an arrow and it hitting the bullseye? It's again, it's not absolutely 0, but it's very close to 0. So let's say P blind hit is approximately 0. Okay. But what if we imagine that however the archer shoots, the wind conspires to redirect the arrow to the bullseye? Okay? Do you agree that if there's a very helpful wind, the probability is approximately 1? Yes. P blind hit given helpful wind is approximately equal to 1. Okay? And that's true. That's undeniable. That is true. The problem is this requires more than just hitting a small target by chance. It also requires very special cooperation from the wind. So what was already hard, effectively impossible, you've now compounded with another impossibility in order to, you think, solve a problem, and you haven't actually solved a problem. Okay? So if we go back to probability math, you can actually prove this, that it's actually worse. That's a worse explanation than he just happened to hit it, or she just happened to hit it. Okay, P blind hit given helpful wind times P helpful wind. Remember, that's the joint probability. So that's equal to P blind hit and helpful wind, right? The two things happening. Okay, but this is P blind hit and helpful wind, which is less probable than just one of those things happening, right? P blind hit is going to be much higher, even though it's close to 0, than P blind hit and helpful wind, okay? That's just a necessary fact of joint probabilities. Now, if you look at this equation down here, we know this is close to 1. If you got magic wind, then you're going to hit the bullseye. And we know this is close to 0, because that's what we said. So what is this? No, I'm saying this is close to 1. This probability is close to 1, right? If you do have magic wind, you're going to hit the bullseye, right? Close. Okay. We said from the outset, P blind hit is close to 0. This times this is 0. And this is close to 1. What's this? 0. That's 0. So all this shows is that P helpful wind is 0. It means you can't get the thing. The very structure of this probability means the thing that you hope to solve this problem that's otherwise insoluble is impossible. It's as impossible as the thing you hope to solve. Okay. So more generally, this means, well, it's the opposite of what is hoped for, right? The raw improbability of the blind hit trumps the conditional probability. This is what makes it 0. This is what makes it impossible. You can do all the conditionals you want. It doesn't matter. That's the thing that trumps, not the other way around. Okay? So if we go back to life now, the probability of life by accident being 0 trumps the conditional probability of life by accident given some helpful natural selection story, okay? And this is where 150 years of evolutionary theory, they think that if you can give a story that makes the outcome seem plausible, you solve the problem. They don't realize that all you've done is given a story that's impossible. So right? The probability, you're not improving the probability, you're making it worse by giving this condition. So here's the correct interpretation. It's not that original interpretation. It's this, that the special conditions needed for an outcome that is beyond the reach of chance to become probable are themselves beyond the reach of chance, okay? If the raw improbability is close to 0, and you cook up some special conditions and say, oh, now it's probable, well, your special conditions are impossible, okay? And this is just falls out of straight probability theory. It's a paper needs to be written on this. I gave this talk at the Evangelical Philosophical, or something like this, Evangelical Philosophical Society meeting, and my colleague Bill Dembski, anyone heard of Bill Dembski? He's a pretty well-known mathematician who's done work on the design inference and intelligent design, and he was on the panel, and he said he had an epiphany when I gave this arrow thing, and he's now written a paper that gives a general demonstration of the conservation of information, which is, he's been working on this for decades, and he said, what you said clicked, and I've now got a general, simple version of it that came out of this. Okay, so it's interesting because I view it as kind of a psychology thing. There's a reason people think the way they think, and they don't always do a reality check. They just think the way they think because it seems to work. Okay, now why does this matter? I want to go back to kind of the big stuff, and we'll end with scripture. I've talked about the bottom-up view of reality and the top-down view of reality. This is a page from a book by Daniel Dennett. It's called Darwin's Dangerous Idea, the late Daniel Dennett, atheist, well-known atheist. And this section is called Darwin's Assault on the Cosmic Pyramid. And it's too small probably for you to see here, but this pyramid has God on top, and then mind, and then design, and then order, and then chaos, and then nothing. And what he's saying is classical human thought is top down. God is the one from which everything comes, including humans, and humans design, and you only have chaos. I mean, Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and earth, and the earth was formless and void. And then as Genesis continues, God takes the formless and void, the chaos, and he builds something out of it, okay? So that's the classical view. He's saying Darwin turned that upside down, and so we now know that nothingness, this chaos, is what gave rise to everything, including God, an invention of humanity. So it's this view. Bottom up is this view. Matter made humans, and this is why it connects to AI and robotics. Matter made humans, and humans make robots and AI. And are humans better than matter? Yeah, they're more sophisticated than matter. So if the smaller can make the greater, why wouldn't AI outstrip us? The smaller make the greater. But this is false. Completely false. The truth is this: God Almighty made humans in his image, but we will never be his equal, ever, never. There's nothing we can do to become his equal. And humans make robots and AI, and they will never be our equal. They can't. It's impossible, because the created thing can never rise to the level of the creator. This is fundamental truth in Scripture. Deuteronomy 32, 4 through 6. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children, because they are blemished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is not he your Father who created you, who made you and established you? This very clear view in Scripture that the Creator is necessarily superior to the created, okay? And that's true of our creations too. We're the creator of things that are necessarily inferior to us. That's the logic of creation. Romans 9, 20 and 21. But who are you, O man, to answer back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? Again, this is a thoroughly, deeply held view and taught view in Scripture that the Creator is over that which is created, okay? And nothing can change that. It's fundamental. Okay, so I will stop there. And I don't suppose there are any questions, but no. I'll entertain questions. Do we have a time? Do we have a hard golf? Okay, sure. So any questions? It was a bit of a whirlwind tour, right? Was that a hand? No, not me. No. Okay, that's fine if we don't. A lot of these ideas have to percolate, I find. When you first exposed to them, you're like, huh. And then you have to go kind of cogitate a bit, which is fine. So we'll have more time in the later talks. Feel free to come back to, Derek, is that a question?
So, one of, like, I have an atheist friend that I used to hang out with all the time. And he kept saying, every time I said he was wrong, improbable, and I didn't know, I just knew that it was very improbable, and so did he. But he said because his theory was, oh, the galaxy's just kind of moving out, just moving up.
Galaxies, what?
The galaxy's been growing, or the whatever it is, everything that we know is growing outwards and mentioned in the Big Bang Theory over and over again.
And that's not held by cosmologists anymore. So that's a, what they call that view? That's not held by cosmologists. Currently believe that the universe is always going to be expanding. They don't believe in a big collapse. Was he saying expand and collapse? Okay.
He was saying because it's infinite, there's an infinite likelihood that at some point or another.
Yeah, again, if you go with current cosmology, it's not believed that our universe is infinite. You can actually put a mass bound. It's believed that there are about 10 to the 80 elementary particles in the universe. But even if you did have an infinite universe, well, that's not what cosmologists today believe. That was called a cyclical model. It used to be pre-Big Bang. A lot of Christians think Big Bang is like anti-Christian. Actually, is one of the most profound discoveries that made physicists and cosmologists very uncomfortable because it sounds like Genesis in the beginning. And before Big Bang Theory came to be, was the steady state model of the universe, where cosmologists thought that the universe, things you see in the sky up there when you look through the telescope, they've just been there forever. Okay, so it's not true, but that was the model, was the steady state model prior to Big Bang Theory. And Big Bang Theory says, no, actually, it's an expanding universe, and it's the redshift. You've heard of the redshift. If you look at these galaxies, they're more red than they should be if the distance is stable between us. So it's suggesting that the further away things are, the faster they're moving away from us, and you get a redshift in the light. That's Einstein's is a relativistic effect. But if the universe is expanding, that means if you go back in time, it was smaller and smaller and smaller, and they think that's how you get Big Bang Theory, that it goes back to a singularity where you have everything started at one point in one time. And when that was, actually Big Bang was a pejorative that Fred Hoyle used. He dismissed it. He said, nobody's going to believe that Big Bang Theory. And he thought it was nuts, but the evidence keeps confirming that there was a beginning to the universe. And the cosmologists hated it, and Fred Hoyle hated it because it sounds too much like, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. They just did not like that. Yeah, Sebastian. Okay, in the sort of the probability calculation we did, it's because I gave that quote from Dawkins where he says, even if you threw cells together for 1 billion years, there's no way you'd get anything that does anything even remotely helpful to keeping it alive. Do you remember that? So I'm starting with this idea that all of us, even the atheists, accept that living things have very, very extraordinary combinations of material to make them work. A cell only works because stuff is very, very extraordinarily put together, okay? What Dawkins is saying, what the atheists are saying, but he's saying, yes, that's true, but you can get a very extraordinary thing through another process. It doesn't require God to understand how to put it together. It could happen accidentally, and here's how it would happen. And that's Darwin's theory. So that's natural selection. So I'm saying if you start with that raw improbability, you can actually prove that you can't get life. If once you concede that raw improbability, you can actually prove that there is no theory that will work, that will explain life. Because their trick is to use a conditional. They say, so Dawkins would say, or the evolutionary thinking is P life by accident, P intelligent life by total accident equals 0, but P intelligent life given natural selection, which is not accidental, is close to 1. Okay, and I'm just saying you're saying that the conditional probability trumps the raw improbability. It's the other way around. That was that last equation that I put up where it said P helpful natural selection is just like the P helpful wind. The probability of it 0. We can talk about it more later. I knew that gets mathy, but it's not complex math. But if you haven't seen it before, you have to kind of fiddle with it.
Okay. When you were talking about the mental and material realm and how God is the mediator,
Yep.
could you elaborate on you saying that God is in control of that?
I'm not saying, so let's go back to, let me tell you what I'm not saying. Because, yeah, that could raise all kinds of questions. I'm not saying that you aren't having your own thoughts and that you don't have free will. I believe in free will. I think Scripture aligns with free will. So there's a real you that's mentally active, and that's you, and this is your body, right? And they're both part of you by God's design. So what I'm saying is, Scripture says, He knows my thoughts before I think them. You, O Lord, know my thoughts before I think them. I think that's a Davidic psalm. So God is supremely in control. God is omniscient and fully aware of everything that's happening inside you mentally. He knows your thoughts. God is absolutely in control of every atom in the universe, okay, including the ones in your body. So what's happening by this view is God is there with you. You think things. Your body needs to respond as you think things, and your thinking needs to respond as things come to your body. And both ways, God is the one who graciously is taking your thoughts and then moving them appropriately into your body, starting with the brain, and then it has knock-on effect, and vice versa. When you're hearing me speak, it's air vibrating that's vibrating the eardrums, that's sending a signal to the auditory part of the brain that gets processed through maybe something that looks like a neural net. I mean, they could be onto something, okay? But none of that is hearing until God takes some brain state where the auditory neurons have now been tickled in a certain way, and then gives you the auditory, gives you the sound, okay? And that's a mental thing, right? Does that make sense? So I'm not saying God, when you decide to do something, you did decide, but God's the one who enabled it to become something where your body moves. Something interesting I was going to say on the neural net. I don't know. I'm on the fence as to how the brain works, but it's extraordinarily very complicated. One of the things that I've observed is when I dream, tell me if you can relate to this. If I'm just sort of imagining a conversation, which you can easily do, then I'm making up what I say, and I'm thinking I got to go in and talk to my boss about something, and I'll go through this dialogue in my head. But in my head, in my mind, I'm generating both sides of it, right? And I'm aware that I'm generating. So I'll say this to him. Oh, but he might say this. I'm generating both sides. In a dream, it's not like that. In a dream, I can talk to someone, and it's as though I'm just hearing them say something back. And it's not, I didn't tell you to say that. You just said that. Do you agree with that? It's often like that in a dream. I wonder if, and it's not always that sensible. Sometimes you think, oh, that was a really profound conversation. And then you wake up and you go, wait, it was actually kind of bizarre. I wonder if there really is like a large language model, that part of our language facility is something like a large language model in the brain. And when you're sleeping, it's giving these sort of here's a word stream that's like conversation, and then you interact with it, and then it gives you more word streams. That's just a hypothesis. But it's interesting that in my experience, I don't know what that person's going to say to me in a dream when I've said something, and I'm just hearing it. And at the same time, when I review it after I wake up, the thing that I thought was, oh, that was a really deep insight. I go, wait a minute, that was a little confused. So it's almost like ChatGPT. It's a little bit confused. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's kind of interesting. Ethan. I've got a very atypical career route. I studied chemical engineering at UC Berkeley. And one of the things that came out of that was I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a chemical engineer. That's a fairly common thing, actually, in your undergrad studies. So I went to grad school. I went to Caltech and moved toward biochemical engineering, and for the first time fell in love with biology, because I didn't like biology. My high school biology experience was dissecting frogs and memorizing bones, and I thought, this is really dry. But when I saw how biology connects with engineering, that made light bulbs go on, and I fell in love with biology as a grad student. So I took molecular genetics, and I took all the biology I could, and I got a minor in biology, and I had a biochemist and a biologist on my thesis exam committee. But during that time, I got married as a grad student, and I felt, I was praying about how I wanted my career to be sort of offered to the Lord. How can I do something that's significant? And I become more and more interested in apologetics. And I deliberately moved my thesis work toward biology because I started to become interested in testing Darwin's theory. But I felt like I should actually land in molecular biology to do that. But with the doctorate that I got, I was able to land a postdoc at the University of Cambridge and actually start doing molecular biology. And the Lord kept opening doors, and sometimes he slammed doors closed. There were all kinds of things where, I'll tell you a couple of them. I got fired at the medical research. I was at the Medical Research Council Center in Cambridge, and it became known that I was doing work funded by Discovery Institute up in Seattle. That's a big funder of intelligent design work. So it became known that I was doing work that was critical of Darwinism. And Sir Alan First was the head of the center where I was working. He wasn't a rabid Darwinist, but he was afraid of the controversy. And so I got an email from his assistant saying, we've run out of space. It was after there was news that broke. A New York newspaper had my name attached to results. Bill Dembski, I just mentioned. They had interviewed Bill Dembski, and he mentioned my work. And someone alerted First that this newspaper article connected me and intelligent design to his center. And I think that freaked him out. And so the email said, we've run out of space, you need to go. So I had 2 weeks notice. At this point, I'm married with twin 2-year-old daughters, face on the floor, crying before the Lord and saying, I know you called me to this work and I can't do it unless you open a door. And he did in a very beautiful way opened up. There was another lab in Cambridge that I had money, so I took the money and finished the work at the Babraham Institute, which is where, anybody remember Dolly the sheep, the cloned sheep? That's where they did that work, and got it published in the Journal of Molecular Biology. So I'll talk more about this stuff later, but I got a result for the probability of getting amino acids to form a functional protein, and that was published in the Journal of Molecular Biology in 2004. And that became just kind of a key. I thought naively, oh, this is the end of Darwin's theory, because I thought this result is so solid, there's no way, but they just ignored it. So I learned a lot about how ideas work in the scientific community. It's not all about fact. It's not about people willing to have their ideas changed. It's a culture, and it's got politics, and there's all kinds of things going on that are very human that aren't always about the truth. Yeah, so we can talk more about that. Yes, Derek.
So you're just talking about having a conversation while you're dreaming, right?
Say that again?
You're talking about a conversation while you're dreaming.
Yes.
And, but I feel like that kind of goes against, because an AI cannot train an AI. So shouldn't that other part of the conversation come from someone else?
I'm not committed to this. I think it's interesting, and this is my perception, that if I imagine a conversation, I'm having to imagine both sides of it. But if I dream a conversation, it feels like I'm having a conversation. I didn't say what you just said. You just said it to me, and now I have to respond to it. So is it possible that God has given humans a spectacularly efficient language acquisition ability, such that is it hard to learn Mandarin Chinese? I would say yes. If you're born in a Mandarin Chinese family, no is the answer. It just comes automatically. So is it possible that as a human being is learning language, there's also some training and wiring to, because there's definitely language centers in the brain that if they take a hit, like a stroke. I have my friend Steve Meyer was going up to give a lecture, and he couldn't speak, and he thought he'd had a stroke. He was terrified. It was a migraine that affected one of the language centers of the brain. So without doubt, our brain is doing stuff that's enabling our use of language. And I'm just wondering whether some of that might look like, it could look like when you become really adept at a language, you're not having to think about each word, it just comes. So is that like your brain now has a way of saying, okay, here would be a good next word. Is it like your brain is doing something where it's presenting the next word? I don't know.
I think I'm trying to say, if all you're doing is just reciting the same things that the data that you already know, all it's going to do is just turn out worse than the original product. So where's the other?
No, I'm not saying I'm saying if I go back to this dream, I'm not saying that when we talk, we're like a large language model. But I'm saying there could be something like a large language model that's an assistant for when we talk. And when you're dreaming, maybe that assistant is just getting a little workout, because it is known that sleep is important for refreshing brain activity. There's all kinds of things you can't do well if you deprive yourself of sleep, and nobody knows exactly how this works. I'm suggesting that there might be a language component that's kind of like a large language model in that it's offering up plausible words. And then this bot in your dream could be just something that's offering up plausible words, and you didn't have to work for it because your brain did it. And then I don't know. But you talk to me if you think that's incoherent, because it might be. Reese. I'm saying that as God has designed us, we are an immaterial mind, soul, spirit knit to a physical body. Okay, but as we well know, your body can be tortured and killed and mutilated and burned, and that's not the end of you. Okay, so you don't it's not a logical necessity that the human mind, soul, spirit has to have a body. It's a promise and part of God's design and grace that it will have a body. And so our hope is in eternity, we do have bodies. We're going to be embodied mind, soul, spirits. That's what we're designed to be. But no, it's not a logical necessity for a mind to have a body. God is a mind. God the Father is a mind without a body. I've become a little bit skeptical of the medicine of brain dead. Because they come up with things that they say, if this measures this measures this, we'll call it brain dead. I know of, and you probably, if we asked everyone, I know of cases where there was a Biola student who was skateboarding and was hit by a truck and suffered severe brain injury and was in a vegetative state, whatever that means. He was in a vegetative state. And the sort of wisdom was that any recovery he's going to get, he'll get within the first 6 months. Okay? And that's turned out to be profoundly untrue. His parents have devoted themselves to doing everything they can to help him. And we're like 2.5 years on now. And he's still showing progress that was way beyond where he was in 6 months. He's now able to move his body. It's clumsy. He's learning to walk again. He can respond to queries. He's still not good at generating. He doesn't like give you his thoughts, but if you ask him things, he can give responses. And all this is way beyond where he was within 6 months of the injury. So I want to be careful. Modern medicine has ways that it deals with things that are kind of like triage, where you have to figure out what's an acceptable protocol if a human is in this state. And I get that, but I think we have to be really careful about some of the assumptions that go into that. But I think it's perfectly moral and appropriate. A DNR order, for example, if someone says, I don't want extra measures taken to extend my life, I think that's totally appropriate. But I don't know what to think of a human whose body is kept going for a long time, but there's no sign of mental activity. I don't know what that looks like. All right. Thank you all.